On May 31st, 1223, along the banks of a small river in what is now Ukraine, a catastrophic battle unfolded that would go down in military history. 80,000 warriors, composed of the combined forces of the Russian princes and their Cuman allies, were chasing down a Mongol army of just 20,000 men. For 9 straight days, the larger force had pursued their smaller enemy across the endless Eurasian steppe. Victory seemed almost certain. Yet what happened next at the Kalka River would become one of the most disastrous defeats of the Middle Ages. This story is not merely about a single battle. It is about a 5,500-kilometer campaign spanning 3 years, masterminded by 2 military geniuses who are still relatively unknown today. How could a force of just 20,000 cavalry defeat an army 4 times its size? And why did this longest reconnaissance campaign in history play such a pivotal role in shaping the destiny of Europe? To understand, we need to go back to 1220. The Mongol Empire had just annihilated the Khwarezmian Empire, one of the most powerful states in Central Asia. Cities such as Bokhara and Samarkand had been razed, and Shah Muhammad II was fleeing westward, terrified for his life. He would eventually die of exhaustion, but the Mongols were not simply seeking revenge. They were guided by strategic calculation. Genghis Khan had one golden rule: never leave a threat at your back. When the Shah fled, Genghis dispatched his 2 most talented generals, Jib and Subutai, to hunt him down and eliminate him. This was more than a punitive expedition. Subutai, a 45-year-old son of blacksmith with no noble lineage, requested special permission from Genghis Khan. After completing their mission, he wanted to continue westward, not to conquer, but to scout. Genghis agreed, a decision that would ultimately change the course of European history. What followed was the greatest military intelligence operation of the Middle Ages. 20,000 cavalry operating for 3 years, covering over 5,500 kilometers across what is now 15 countries, all to determine whether Europe could be conquered. To understand the genius of this campaign, we must know the men who led it. Jib, nicknamed the Arrow, was once a soldier in the army of Genghis Khan's enemy. During battle, he had shot an arrow that struck Genghis in the neck, nearly killing him. When captured, instead of pleading for mercy, he openly admitted, "I was the one who shot you." Genghis Khan, impressed by his loyalty and courage, pardoned him and gave him a new name, Jib, meaning arrow. From an enemy to one of the 4 most prestigious generals in Genghis's army, Jib became renowned for his boldness and tactical daring. Subutai, on the other hand, was the strategic mind. Born in 1175 as the son of a blacksmith named Ji Gudai, Subutai's rise to supreme command in an empire dominated by nobility was extraordinary. At 14, he volunteered for Genghis Khan's army and, following his older brother Jelm, was assigned as a door guard to Genghis's yurts. This seemingly humble post allowed him to overhear strategic discussions and develop his understanding of warfare. Subutai famously told Genghis, "I will ward off your enemies as felt cloth protects one from the wind," and he proved his word. By the age of 22, he commanded his first campaign against the Merkits, achieving a complete victory not through brute force but through deception, posing as a deserter, infiltrating the enemy camp, spreading false information to lower their guard, and then coordinating a surprise attack with the main army. From that point on, Subutai became Jib's mentor and partner. Together, they complemented each other perfectly. Jib, bold and decisive. Subutai, careful and calculating. By 1223, when tasked with pursuing Shah Muhammad II, they were no longer just generals. They were a perfect war machine. The campaign began in the winter of 1220. Shah Muhammad fled across Persia, but Jib and Subutai were not in a rush. They understood the true objective, to learn. They studied the construction of Persian cities, mapped trade routes, identified alliances and rivalries, and observed who could be bribed or would fight to the death. Along the way, cities were plundered selectively. Ray was looted, Zanjan burned, Kasvin met a similar fate. But when they reached Tabriz, one of Persia's wealthiest cities, something remarkable occurred. The local ruler, Adalbeg of Azerbaijan, sent envoys offering a massive tribute: money, clothing, and most importantly, horses. Subutai and Jebe accepted. They did not need to destroy Tabriz. They needed supplies for the continuation of their expedition. By paying the ransom, the city unwittingly funded the Mongol army for the next stage of their campaign. This episode illustrates a critical aspect of Mongol strategy. They were not always ruthless. They were calculating. If a city surrendered and proved useful, it was spared. If it resisted, it faced total destruction. The lesson was simple and terrifying. Cooperate and live, resist and die. This 3-year, 5,500-kilometer reconnaissance campaign was far more than a series of raids. It was a sophisticated military intelligence operation. Subutai and Jebe gathered critical knowledge about the terrain, enemy forces, and political dynamics of the regions they traversed. They tested the limits of Mongol cavalry, experimented with new tactics, and prepared the foundation for future European campaigns. What might seem like a small battle at the Kalka River was, in fact, the culmination of years of careful planning, strategic calculation, and intelligence gathering that would shape European history for decades to come. In early 1221, Shah Muhammad II finally succumbed to exhaustion on a small island in the Caspian Sea. With the primary mission accomplished, one might have expected Subutai and Jebe to turn back, but they did not. Instead, they turned north, launching a campaign into Georgia, a powerful Christian kingdom known for its long tradition of warriors and fortified cities. During January and February of 1221, they faced a combined Georgian-Armenian army numbering around 30,000. Jebe demonstrated his audacity and tactical brilliance by setting up an ambush with just 5,000 men, while Subutai's main force conducted a feigned retreat. The Georgian cavalry, believing they had gained the upper hand, pursued and engaged the smaller Turkic forces. That was precisely what the Mongols had anticipated. When the Georgians overextended, Jebe's ambush closed in. The result was devastating. King George IV was mortally wounded and soon died, while the Mongols pillaged the countryside, leaving devastation in their wake. By March, Subutai and Jebe returned to Azerbaijan to besiege Moraga. With calculated ruthlessness, they used prisoners as human shields at the front of each assault, ensuring maximum psychological pressure on the defenders. Eventually, the city fell, and much of its population was killed. Yet even this was only the prelude to an even more extraordinary feat. Crossing the Caucasus Mountains in the dead of winter, at Derbent, a strategic gateway city, the Mongols displayed their combination of diplomacy and intimidation. Rather than laying siege, Subutai negotiated. Provide us with 10 guides to lead us safely through mountains, and your city will remain untouched. The city agreed, but to guarantee compliance, the Mongols executed one of the guides in front of the others, a brutal but effective warning. The crossing was perilous. They abandoned their siege engines to lighten the load, and hundreds of soldiers perished from the cold. When they finally emerged on the northern slopes, they entered a completely new world. The Pontic-Caspian steppe, inhabited by nomadic tribes, where Subutai would demonstrate one of the most brilliant examples of military diplomacy in history. By early 1222, Subutai and Jebe faced a massive alliance of roughly 50,000 warriors, including the Alans, Saracens, and Kipchaks, also known as Cumans. Their force numbered only 20,000, exhausted from the grueling Caucasus crossing, and yet they faced an army 2.5 times their size. Most generals would have avoided engagement, but Subutai was no ordinary commander. He first sought to weaken the coalition without a fight. Subutai sent envoys to the Kipchaks, appealing to shared identity and culture. We are all nomads. We speak the same Turkic language and share the same customs. Why fight for the Alans and other settled peoples who are different from us? Withdraw, and we will share the spoils. The Kipchaks, persuaded by this reasoning, eventually abandoned the alliance. Isolated, the Alans and Saracens were attacked separately and decisively defeated. However, Subutai brilliance extended even further. Once the Kipchaks were isolated, he turned his attention to them, striking with ruthless efficiency, though they had agreed to a temporary truce. In war, promises only hold as long as they remain strategically useful. The Mongols annihilated both Cuman armies. Survivors, led by Khan Kodian, fled westward, carrying news that would trigger one of the greatest chain reactions in European history. In the spring of 1223, Khan Kodian arrived in Kiev. He brought more than gold, silver, silks, and enslaved women. He carried a dire warning. A new, unstoppable army had crossed the Caucasus and was sweeping all before it. Today, it had come for us. Tomorrow, it could come for you. Kodian's daughter, married to Prince Mstislav the Bold of Galicia, relayed this message to the Rus princes, summoning them to action. But there was an immediate problem. Kievan Rus was not a unified nation. The region was a loose federation of competing principalities. Kiev, once the central power under Mstislav III Romanovich, had weakened over the years. Meanwhile, Galicia-Volhynia, led by Mstislav the Bold, was rising in influence. Other principalities, including Chernihiv, Smolensk, and Vladimir Suzdal, pursued their own agendas. While they debated how to respond, the Mongols were already advancing. Subutai sent his first envoys with a diplomatic offer. We have no quarrel with Kievan Rus. Our conflict is with the Cumans. Leave them be, and we might even share their territory with you. This was a shrewd move. Subutai knew his army of 20,000 could not face the combined force of 80,000. He did not want a premature engagement. Instead, he used diplomacy to delay conflict, isolate enemies, and reduce the number of combatants he would face simultaneously. The Rus princes, however, made a critical error. They killed the envoys, one of the gravest offenses in Mongol culture. Genghis Khan's prior campaigns had demonstrated the consequences of such actions, as the killing of envoys had previously led to the total destruction of the Khwarezmian Empire. Subutai sent a second delegation, offering one final chance for peace. But again, the envoys were killed. In response, the Rus princes mobilized their armies, 80,000 men in total, including heavily armored Russian cavalry, light Cuman horse archers, and infantry wielding axes and spears. On paper, the force was overwhelming. Yet there was a critical flaw: no unified command. Mstislav the Bold favored bold, decisive action, wanting to engage immediately, while Mstislav III of Kiev preferred caution, urging consolidation, reconnaissance, and careful planning. Neither had authority over the other, and the lack of coordination would prove catastrophic. This division and disunity created the perfect conditions for Subutai's brilliance to shine. Each prince in the Rus-Cuman alliance was free to act as he pleased, and this was exactly what Subutai had been waiting for. By early May 1223, the Allied forces crossed the Dnieper River, a major logistical achievement, as 80,000 men had to traverse using lashed-together boats as makeshift bridges. They then marched eastward along the Zalosny steppe, confident and eager to engage the Mongols. But what they encountered first was not the main Mongol army, but a carefully positioned rear guard. Subutai had left 1,000 men under the command of Officer Hambek as bait. Mstislav the Bold, leading the cavalry, immediately attacked this rear guard. Mongol arrows rained down like a storm, but the Russian Cuman force vastly outnumbered the defenders. In the skirmish, every single one of the 1,000 Mongols was killed. On paper, this was a victory. The Rus-Cumans cheered and celebrated, believing they had overcome their enemies. But this was exactly the trap Subutai had designed. Mstislav, flushed with confidence from an easy victory, assumed the Mongols were weak. He did not wait. He pursued them relentlessly. The Mongols did not flee in fear. Instead, they executed a classic tactic known as the feigned retreat. For 9 days, they led the Rus-Kuman army on a grueling chase across 200 miles of open steppe. The Mongols constantly harassed the pursuing forces with small, hit-and-run attacks. Arrows targeted flanks. Minor skirmishes caused casualties, and then they vanished, refusing to stand in formation. These continual assaults, though minor, only increased the determination of Mstislav to press forward, believing every attack indicated Mongol weakness. But gradually, the larger army's strength waned. Supplies ran low, horses grew exhausted, and soldiers became irritable. Units moved at different speeds, stretching the once cohesive 80,000-man force into a long, strung-out train, separated by miles. Determination blinded them to the dangers ahead. On May 30th, they reached the Kalka River, a shallow tributary believed to correspond to the modern Kelchik River flowing into the Sea of Azov. Here, everything changed. At dawn on May 31st, 1223, Subutai and Jeeb stopped their retreat. 20,000 Mongol cavalry lined the eastern bank of the Kalka River, prepared for battle. Mstislav the Bold, observing them across the water, saw what he believed was the moment of reckoning. He ordered his heavy cavalry to cross immediately, seeking to overwhelm the Mongols with sheer force. But the second critical error occurred. Mstislav III of Kiev, the more cautious prince, wanted to wait until the entire army had consolidated. Heated arguments broke out, but no one held decisive authority, leaving the army divided. Mstislav the Bold, along with the Kuman cavalry, crossed the shallow river ford, brimming with confidence. They charged head-on, seeking to smash the Mongol lines with momentum and brute strength. Initially, they overwhelmed the Mongol rear detachment, creating the illusion of a breakthrough. Yet, this was another trap. Subutai had strategically positioned his forces to exploit overconfidence. As the Rus-Kuman cavalry pressed forward, Mongol troops struck from both flanks, unleashing a coordinated counterattack. Arrows rained like black rain, while Mongol cavalry struck at terrifying speed. Panic spread to the Kuman light cavalry, who, in fleeing, crashed into the rear of the Rus-Kuman formation, spreading chaos. The Mongols poured to the gap like water through a broken dam. The vanguard of the Rus-Kumans was shattered before the second wave could even engage. Mstislav the Bold attempted to retreat, some cavalry escaping toward the Dnieper, but 6 other princes were killed in the pursuit. Mstislav III of Kiev, meanwhile, remained safely in his fortified camp, surrounded by circular wagons and sharpened stakes, a strong defensive position. Subutai divided his forces with tactical precision. One contingent surrounded Mstislav III's camp to prevent escape, while the rest pursued the fleeing army. The fortified camp was well chosen. The steep hill slopes hindered cavalry charges, and the wagon circle provided cover for archers. The Rus defenders repelled multiple Mongol assaults. The Mongols dismounted to attack on foot, try and pull wagons apart and breach defenses, while the Rus warriors stabbed and slashed from above. For 3 days, the camp held firm, demonstrating the effectiveness of well-prepared defensive positions even against the greatest cavalry force of the age. But Subutai was patient and ruthless. When the defenders ran out of food and were exhausted, he sent an ultimatum: surrender, and we will allow you to leave safely if you abandon your weapons, banners, and possessions. Mstislav III, weary and trapped, agreed. Yet this decision would prove fatal. As the Rus warriors emerged from the wagons, bound hand and foot, the Mongols did not honor safety. Mstislav III and his 2 sons-in-law were laid on the ground, wooden planks stacked atop them, and Subutai prepared the final merciless blow. Jeeb and the senior Mongol commanders climbed onto a makeshift wooden platform, rickety but sufficient for what they planned. Here, atop this precarious structure, they set up a victory feast, laughing and celebrating the culmination of years of planning and relentless pursuit. Beneath the creaking platform lay the 3 captured Rus princes, bound and helpless. Then, in a cruel and calculated demonstration of Mongol justice, the platform collapsed under the weight of the feast, crushing the princes to death. This was not wanton cruelty, but deliberate symbolism. In Mongol belief, Royal blood could not be spilled directly, but punishment was still necessary for those who broke sacred codes, such as the killing of envoys. The message was unmistakable. Betrayal would not be tolerated, and promises broken would be repaid in full. As the sun set on May 31st, 1223, the steppes around the Kalka River were littered with the bodies of fallen. According to Rus chronicles, the devastation was almost total. Of the 80,000 warriors who had set out in pursuit of the Mongols, only about 8,000 survived, a mere 1 in 10. 12 Rus princes perished, 3 executed under the collapsing platform, 6 killed during the chaotic retreat toward the Dnieper, and others slain during scattered skirmishes. Mongol casualties were minimal, numbering perhaps only a few hundred. Yet there was a notable loss: Jeeb. Historians believe he sacrificed himself, commanding the 1,000-man rear guard that had acted as bait. This unit was annihilated deliberately, a calculated loss to ensure the destruction of an army 80 times their size. Such was the precision and ruthlessness of Mongol strategy. Subutai continued the campaign alone, raiding the region with unmatched efficiency. He defeated a Volga-Bulgar force and another Cuman contingent before finally returning to the main Mongol army in 1204. The campaign had lasted 3 years, covered 5,500 miles, and established what remains the longest cavalry reconnaissance raid in history. Beyond plunder, Subutai brought back invaluable intelligence: the geography of Eastern Europe, the political divisions among the principalities, the strengths and weaknesses of local armies, and a clear understanding of the feasibility of conquering Europe. This intelligence would shape Mongol strategy for decades. 15 years later, in 1237, the Mongols returned, not for reconnaissance, but for full-scale conquest. Subutai and Badr Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson, led an army exceeding 100,000 men. The precision of the previous campaign paid off. Within 3 years, they had subjugated Kiev, Chernihiv, Galicia Volhynia, and Vladimir Suzdal. Poland and Hungary were invaded, and the Mongols reached the gates of Vienna. Every move in this campaign relied upon the intelligence gathered during the extraordinary expedition of 1220 to 1223. The story of Subutai and the Kalka River offers timeless lessons. First, information is the ultimate weapon. Subutai did not rely solely on brute force. He fought with knowledge. He understood the terrain, the habits of his enemies, the loyalties of allies, and the divisions among adversaries. He knew who would fight to the death and who could be persuaded to stand aside. In today's world, whether in business, leadership, or personal endeavors, the individual with the best information consistently makes superior decisions. Second, unity determines strength, while division guarantees defeat. The Rus-Cuman alliance outnumbered the Mongols 4-1, yet their lack of coordination rendered them powerless. Each prince acted independently, with no unified command, while the Mongols, though outnumbered, executed a clear chain of command. Every soldier knew his role, every maneuver was planned, and every action was synchronized. The result: 20,000 disciplined men routed 80,000 divided adversaries. Cohesion, in organizations, families, or teams, outweighs mere numbers. Third, patience triumphs over haste. Mstislav the Bold, intoxicated by early success, rushed across the river and pursued the Mongols relentlessly. Subutai, by contrast, demonstrated measured patience, willing to sacrifice 1,000 men, retreat hundreds of miles, and wait for the perfect moment to strike. The lesson is clear. Strategic patience is often more decisive than impulsive aggression. Fourth, humility opens doors. Subutai, the son of a blacksmith, came from a background that should have barred him from military command in an empire dominated by noble bloodlines. Yet he did not allow his origins to limit him. He studied, trained, and proved his capabilities, earning Genghis Khan's trust and rising to the highest ranks. Today, opportunities are more accessible than ever, but effort and competence remain essential to achieving greatness. Fifth, never underestimate your opponent. The Rus princes considered the Mongols mere steppe barbarians, assuming that superior numbers and armor guaranteed victory. They were catastrophically wrong. The Mongols were sophisticated military engineers, coordinating armies across hundreds of miles, using diplomacy, intelligence, and psychological warfare to dismantle larger, seemingly invincible forces. Respect and study your opponents carefully. Appearances alone can be deceiving. Finally, history is not just about dates and events. It is about choices. Subutai could have remained a blacksmith. Mstislav the Bold could have waited. The Rus princes could have united. Each made decisions that shaped the fate of thousands, even millions, for centuries. Our own decisions, though on a smaller scale, are no less significant. Every choice carries consequences, and even in seemingly small actions, the potential to alter outcomes is real. The Kalka River campaign demonstrates that strategy, intelligence, patience, unity, humility, and respect for opponents are not just military lessons. They are principles for life. Subutai's genius turned a small force into an unstoppable instrument of conquest. Mstislav's haste and the disunity of the Rus princes led to one of the most devastating defeats in medieval history. And the lessons endure. Preparation, discipline, and strategic thinking remain as relevant now as they were on the open steppes of 1223.